Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today, and we're kicking off the week with the wonderful Batya Ungar-Sargon. Batya, great to have you back with us.
Good morning, Robby. Thank you so much for having me back, and good morning to all of you watching. We're opening with some actually, frankly, disturbing news. There's new details coming out of Uvalde, Texas, about what went wrong that day. A new investigative report on the Robb Elementary School shooting spreads blame across every law enforcement agency that responded to the attack, according to the Washington Post. The 77-page Texas House report condemned agencies on the scene, saying that a void of leadership could have contributed to the loss of life as injured victims waited over an hour for help. Nearly 400 local, state, and federal law enforcement officers were at the scene that day, none of whom took charge of the response, according to the report.
Back when the shooting happened, Governor Greg Abbott had pledged $5 million of state money in the form of grants to public health officials for mental health providers, advocates, and other personnel. However, according to the Post, grieving families under a financial stress have said that information on how to access public or private funds has been unclear or non-existent, while the Texas DA has not responded to how the money will be administered at all, which is, just another failure on top of everything else. And obviously last week we saw some of that hallway footage from, the Austin Statesman, I believe, the newspaper that had obtained that, written about it, released a lot of it, seeing all of these police officers standing around for what we now know to be about 77 minutes, just horrifying failure to act, contrary, again, I've said this so many times on the show, it bears repeating, contrary to what they were instructed and trained to do. It's obviously, I think, difficult to say, well, you have to be brave in the moment. It's a very daunting, terrifying situation with this heavily armed man in a classroom, but they are instructed not to wait, not to formulate a plan, just like throw yourself at the shooter is the instructions to all police in situations like this, and actually was the exact instructions to these police, and they decided not to do that anyway.
Yeah, it seems like the only response team that did that was the BORTAC agents who showed up on the scene, the Border Control Tactical Unit, who showed up and then at some point just stopped waiting, stopped listening to Chief Arredondo, ignored the chain of command, and went in. That seems to be what one is supposed to do in these situations. I will say, Robby, learning about reading this report, learning about what was in it, one thing that did come out was that the most of the killing was done right in the beginning, meaning that there wasn't shooting that went on after that where he was shooting at children, shooting at teachers. It seems that the murderer did most of the shooting right in the beginning, and that the people who died as a result of the law enforcement waiting, these epic failures, died because they could have been helped at the hospital. And I think that is very important. I mean, obviously, these are such huge failures, and I cannot imagine what the families are going through. I mean, it's so hard to each for us, and we're not related to them, to learn every moment about what could have been done to help more people, what could have been done. But it doesn't seem like if they had actually acted the way they should have, they would have. The report says they wouldn't have been able to save most of the people who were killed, most of the children who were killed. And to me, I don't want to say that that's small comfort, but to me that does change a little bit the calculus. And the other point I wanted to make was, this is going to sound maybe, tell me what you think about this, Robby. I watched that footage. I'm horrified like everybody else. But I see confusion more than cowardice. I see mistakes in judgment rather than a failure to want to help. I think Chief Arredondo made a single massive error where he thought that the shooter was barricaded and that all danger was over, and that was a huge tactical error. And then it just compounded after that. But for law enforcement, they're going to have to carry that for the rest of their lives. I mean, the burden of that failure, I don't know if this is a betrayal of the families to say, I can't help but feel for them as well, even while watching them in the moments of these like epic failures as the time is passing on. And I'm so enraged and so angry. How could they not go in? But, I can't imagine having to carry that for the rest of my life. What do you think, Robby?
I mean, I hear that, and we see the footage, and it's hard to try to even guess, well, what is going through your mind as you're down this hallway from a mass shooter who's in this classroom. There are victims in there. Maybe you presume they're dead already. And, we can't really read their face. We can read their faces and pretend like we know what they're thinking, but we really don't. But then I have to square that against the fact that bystanders outside the school, parents, were clawing eyes out to get into the school. That a woman broke free of the restraint. The police had restrained her, broke free, went into the school, got her kids out. They were fighting to get in to do something. So if they had that, if the non-state actors had this drive to go to do what you're supposed to do, which is everybody rush the shooter, that makes it so much harder for me to understand. If we do cowardice, incompetence, whatever it is, it just seems like such a gross failure, given that other people wanted to do something. They wanted to help, and they were being prevented from doing so. That's the only good the cops were doing for an hour, was actually marshaling their forces to prevent the parents from and it's one thing to prevent the parents from interfering because you have it you're taking care of it, but they weren't taking care of it. So that really makes it harder, even so, for me to have anything but really a lot of contempt for what was done and how it happened. And even if, as you say, I find it plausible that sooner action might not have saved a lot more lives. I think according to that report, it sounds like it could have helped a little bit if some people had gotten to the hospital sooner. And then anyway, every minute that even the people who survived anyway had to spend in that classroom, they will be reliving that in their nightmares, in therapy sessions for the rest of their lives. Every minute it could have been cut shorter, even if it didn't make a difference in the death toll. I would think should have been, is something also to consider.
Yeah, no, those are all really, really good points. I mean, yeah, of course, every life is infinitely precious. So anyone who died on the way to the hospital, those deaths are on, law enforcement and that epic failure. You're bringing up a really important point, which is the parents, wanting to charge in there, wanting to save their children. And, it's actually reignited a conversation about, vigilante justice, I think, which is increasingly relevant in different contexts. Over this weekend, a debate about gun carrying lit up social media after a shooting in Indianapolis left 3 dead, but was stopped by an armed witness who gunned down the mass shooter. And that man was called a good Samaritan by the authorities who arrived on the scene. So, Robby, where are you on, vigilante justice, especially in moments like this where, we're confronted with the epic failures sometimes of law enforcement?
Right, we're frequently confronted by it. This is something I hear a lot of sort of progressives who want very strict gun control. And they say, oh, well, if armed citizens are so important, why does an armed citizen never stop a crime? Like, actually, there's countless examples of that happening, routine examples. You can find so many examples. This is another one. The police said, this is a great example. The police said more lives could have been lost if this person who was carrying legally, was doing everything right, saw that there was an active shooter situation, intervened and neutralized the shooter, so responded to the crisis correctly, took out the right person. We always hear that, oh, there's going to be confusion. What if they shoot the wrong person? What if, that kind of thing. No, there are examples of armed citizens taking the right action, and this was one of those situations. Obviously, you can think that's not the way it's supposed to be. The law enforcement is supposed to handle this, but yeah, at a time when law enforcement, I think, is really failing, and a time where law enforcement is maybe needed. Where I think you and I are both very concerned. You're in New York, I'm in D.C. I'm very concerned about the rising crime we're facing in many American cities, not all American cities, but many of them. And I think a lot of people have the attitude, what can be done? Should it be more police? But then that argument is harder to make when in moments of crisis you see police acting so irresponsibly as they did in Uvalde.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've also seen reports that, criminals will frequently say that, the presence of a gun on scene will stop them, or if they know if the person there has a gun, they would not have, engaged in criminal behavior in that context, et cetera. I mean, I've never actually heard a criminal say that, but I've read reports that is something that they do say. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, it comes down to like, are you going to put your trust in the state to protect you, or do you want that level of autonomy to do your best to protect yourself in certain contexts, to protect your own family, to protect your church? There was a case of somebody carrying in a church who put down a mass shooter. I think that was like 6 months ago, something like that. You do see these stories coming up, and it's very hard not to feel like, of course, the right term for that is Good Samaritan, because that person saved lives.
Yeah. Well, stay with us. We'll tell you what's on our radars coming up next.